is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. President Putin promises Africa grain and debt write-offs as Moscow seeks new allies. But Africa's leaders tell him the war in Ukraine is threatening global food security. Our other headlines: the EU suspends aid and military support to the West African state of Niger after the army seizes power. China and France look to deepen economic ties in the face of the EU's pledge to de-risk from Beijing. And counting the cost, Greece assesses the damage after wildfires destroy homes, farms and factories. South Africa's president has been holding talks with Russia's President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg, a day after he called for peace in Ukraine. Earlier this week, President Ramaphosa warned that Russia's withdrawal from the Black Sea grain deal is damaging food security across Africa. He met the Russian leader after the Russia-Africa summit, where President Putin pledged closer ties with the continent. The Kremlin says Putin has decided to take part in next month's BRICS summit in Johannesburg by video link. If he attends in person, he runs the risk of being arrested. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Leon Senayange in St. Petersburg. Leon, what more did President Ramaphosa have to say?
Well, President Cyril Ramaphosa's meeting today morning with the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, was entirely about re-echoing what he has been requesting of Russia over the past several weeks. And therein was for Russia to come to a negotiating table and a dialogue with to end the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, that conflict has had an adverse effect majorly in Africa, where there's been shortages of energy, but also still the shortages of food. And according to the Red Cross, approximately 140 million people on the continent of Africa are going hungry because of potentially the decision for Russia to pull out of the Black Sea grain deal. It's indeed a very important issue that African leaders are pushing, and Cyril Ramaphosa therein insisting that there must come to a resolution to end that conflict. But just as much, President Cyril Ramaphosa was pushing for Russia to try and extend the hand for inclusion of African Union in the United Nations Security Council. Currently, Africa has only 3 slots of non-permanent members, that is Ghana, Gabon and Mozambique. Africa is demanding for a position on the higher table so as to be able to call the shots, also in trying to achieve peace, for which the UN Security Council is purposed. And of course, the BRICS issue came on the table. South Africa will be organizing the summit next month in Johannesburg. The Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, there is saying this week that that he will not be attending physically. He will be attending via video conference. Russia, however, has pledged support to that particular summit, and of course the government saying it will be fully represented by the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
Leon, significant nonetheless, though, the Kremlin acknowledging that Putin will attend the BRICS summit by video link, virtually, and not in person, for fear of arrest.
Yes, that's very, very true. South Africa found itself in very much an uncomfortable position because of the summit and the extension of an invitation to President Vladimir Putin to attend physically. That decision was made that he will not be attending physically. He will be attending via video conference. And again, like I said earlier, Russia will, however, be represented by their Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Of course, South Africa is mandated as a signatory to the Rome Statute to, follow what the International Criminal Court, particularly the arrest warrant on Vladimir Putin because of the Ukrainian conflict. However, this has indeed put South Africa in a rather tough spot. Nonetheless, the BRICS summit is going to go on, and the involvement of Russia will definitely be important there, because it's trying to change the tide of the global perspective of involvement of developing and developed nations in this particular bloc.
You've watched them come and go. Has this summit been a success for the African leaders who did turn up? I mean, many of them stayed away, didn't they?
Yes, compared to the 2019 Sochi meeting, the Russia-Africa summit, 43 leaders then attended. This time around, 17 African heads of state took part in the summit. That has been a considerable, probably 50% reduction in the attendance. And Russia has blamed the West for its meddling in the affairs of African leaders and forcing them not to, pressurizing them not to participate in the summit over the last 2 days. But there have been very good takeaways for the African leaders from the engagements there. Russia and the African nations signing contracts and several memoranda of understanding in different scopes, in energy, education. But again, the biggest gain for Africa was the matter of grain, in which Russia assured, there was a reassurance by Russia that they will be supplying between 25,000 to 50,000 tons of grain over the next few months to 6 African nations that have continuously faced food challenges. Those include Somalia, the Central African Republic, Mali, and also Burkina Faso. The other was Russia writing off a $23 billion debt to African nations. It also pledged support in funding, but also support in industrialization, trade, business, science, education, and also in nuclear energy. So there's been potential opportunities for the two, Russia and Africa, that over the next 3 years, many believe could be profitable in one way or another.
Leon, thank you for that. Our correspondent Leon Seinange in St. Petersburg. 9 people have been injured in Russian airstrikes on the Ukrainian city of Dnipro. 2 teenagers were among those hurt when an apartment block and nearby offices belonging to Ukraine's security services were hit. President Zelensky has denounced what he called a Russian terror attack. Meanwhile, Moscow has accused Kyiv of firing weapons into Russia. Defense chiefs say a missile was shot down 40 kilometers from Ukraine's border. Local officials say 20 people were injured by falling debris. The European Union has suspended financial support and military cooperation with the West African state of Niger. This follows the military coup on Thursday, which ousted the elected government of President Mohamed Bazoum. There's been widespread condemnation of the military takeover in Niger. The United Nations Security Council has called for the immediate release of the president, who's being held under house arrest. The EU has joined the United States and other countries in calling for the unconditional release of Bazoum and a return to democratic rule. Donald Trump says he's the only Republican who can win the United States presidency in 2024 despite facing fresh criminal charges. At a campaign event for presidential hopefuls, he claimed the raft of charges against him were politically motivated. In the latest indictments, Mr. Trump is accused of asking an employee to conceal video evidence from investigators, which he denies. And Emmanuel Macron has become the first French president to visit Sri Lanka. He met his counterpart during a brief stopover, which marked the 75th anniversary of diplomatic ties between the two countries. France is Sri Lanka's 4th largest creditor and has pledged to cooperate with debt restructuring as the country deals with its economic crisis. China's Vice Premier He Lifeng says he hopes France can help stabilize Beijing's relationship with the European Union. EU leaders have committed to de-risk from China, but France's economy minister visiting Beijing says Paris aims to deepen economic and financial ties with China. Our correspondent Aaron Liu reports.
This is the summary of the conversation, which is 11 pages long. The Chinese and French sides are discussing multilateral issues such as climate change and reforming the international financial architecture, as well as bilateral issues like trade between China and France. The meeting agenda specifically focuses on industries such as cosmetics, agriculture, and aviation. According to the Ministry of Economy, Finance and Industry and Digital Sovereignty of France, the Maha's visit also includes plans to meet with Chinese business leaders. The ministry states that France maintains an open attitude towards Chinese investments. The China-France high-level economic and financial dialogue mechanism was established in 2013 and serves as an important platform for both countries to discuss and coordinate major economic and financial issues. It has made positive contributions to deepening practical cooperation, strengthening communication and coordination in the economic and financial field, and promoting the development of the comprehensive strategic partnership between the two countries. Aaron Liu, CGTN, 钓鱼台 State Guest House in Beijing.
Well, China is France's third largest trade partner behind the European Union and the United States. In the first quarter of this year, China's exports to France hit a record high of more than $19 billion. That's up nearly 3% year on year. There was a huge jump in electrical exports, up more than 37.5% compared to the same period a year earlier. And imports from France also increased, up 16.4% to nearly $9 billion, with aircraft imports surging 183%. Well, Rana Mitter is director of the University of Oxford's China Centre. He told me why France is one of the major European powers that China would like to keep on side.
That's partly because it regards France, along with Germany and some of the other major European actors, as important partners for economic purposes, but also because China hopes that it may be able to persuade them on a slightly different path than that of the United States when it comes to geopolitics.
How does this platform contribute to strengthening overall diplomatic and economic ties between China and France?
This is very much a macro platform. In other sense, I think it's where the leaders are going to discuss the big picture. The granularity of whether a particular trade deal or tariff reduction will be done in other places, and probably it will be rather more painstaking. But the wider idea that in particular in areas of science and technology, there may be cooperation between France and China, I think is the overall message that's being sent by this particular meeting. And that, of course, sits in contrast with some of the other powers, again, particularly the United States, which is not looking for technological collaboration with China at the moment.
I was going to ask you, how will this be viewed by other countries?
I think it'll be varied. Some countries, such as the United Kingdom, have also taken a line that there is a need for a reduction in terms of some of the relationships with China when it comes to technical matters. France hasn't exactly taken an opposite view, but it's certainly taken a view that suggests that there are some areas, for instance, in 5G technology, where it's more willing to hear the Chinese argument than, say, the US and the UK. So you might consider it a variation rather than something completely different. But then what we know from past history is that France has quite a long history of having a quite distinctive foreign policy.
You call it distinctive. Is there a tension between a France-China strategy that is markedly different from an EU-China strategy?
I think the main thing is that France always has to make sure that its own quite individualistic version of foreign policy is nonetheless coordinated with Germany within the EU. And Germany, of course, has significant trade relationships with China. I think it would be a mistake to think of France as opposed to the EU policy, rather that France and Germany together have a very, very important influence on it. That's particularly true since the departure of the UK from the EU, which no longer acts as a force that adds a slightly different, perhaps slightly more pro-Washington element to that mix.
With all of the global economic challenges and uncertainties, what are these specific overarching issues in the economic and financial realm that you think will be the focus of this dialogue with Beijing?
I think that France will be concerned, first of all, to make sure that things like international financial norms allow French banks and finance companies to have a role in the Chinese market. As well as that, I think France has an interest, as all Western countries do, in making sure the Asia-Pacific is a fairly calm and stable region, China will want to make sure that it can carry out the rather difficult balancing act of trying to securitize and in some ways close down aspects of its international markets, particularly to do with finance, at the same time as not alienating powers like France, which it obviously needs on board in terms of creating some sorts of international partnerships. So it's a delicate balancing act for both actors.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, thousands of homes evacuated in Beijing as Typhoon Doksuri heads towards the capital. We'll take you to the path of the storm. And Greece cans the cost of nearly 2 weeks of wildfires, destroying homes, forests and farms.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. President Putin promises Africa grain and debt write-offs as Moscow seeks new allies. But Africa's leaders tell him the war in Ukraine threatens global food security. Our other headlines: the EU suspends aid and military support to the West African state of Niger after the army seizes power. And China and France look to deepen economic cooperation in the face of the EU's pledge to de-risk from Beijing. Thousands of people have fled their homes in Beijing as forecasters warn of potentially devastating rainstorms caused by Typhoon Doksuri. Although it's expected to weaken as it moves over northern China, as much as 60 centimetres of rain could fall. Doksuri is the most powerful typhoon to hit China this year. Our correspondent Wu Bin reports.
Typhoon Doksuri has moved to central part of China right now, and China's meteorological center has already stopped the tracking of the typhoon since it's been downgraded to a tropical depression, and it's very hard to track its center. But although the wind is gone, the influence is still there. For example, heavy rains brought by the Typhoon Doksuri has influenced much of the mountainous areas. I'm currently located in the Honglai town of Nan'an City in East China's Fujian province. This place is much lower than other places. You can see that the water is still logging is still very serious around the region. It's still about 30 to 40 centimeters. But I was told last night when the heavy rains came, it's the water level is much higher, and it's been downgrading since then. Various rescue teams has been here to evacuate people and provide emergency services. For the past days, they have transferred many people, including pregnant women, children, and senior citizens, and transfer them to safer places. As I said before, Typhoon Doksuri is gone, but the influence is going to be there. And also, authorities warn people living in central and east part of China, even northern part of China, are going to experience heavy rainfalls in the coming days. People living in there must pay attention to possible landslides brought by the heavy rainfalls.
Greece is counting the cost after nearly 2 weeks of wildfires destroyed homes, forests and farmland. The country's been experiencing a blistering heat wave, but the government says many of the fires were started deliberately. 5 people were killed in the fires. A drop in temperatures and calmer winds have allowed firefighters to get the worst of the fires under control. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Evangelos Sipsas in the city of Karditsa in Greece. Evangelos, the government's saying that many of these fires were started deliberately. What's the latest on the arson investigations?
Well, yeah, that's exactly what the government is saying. They specifically said that a lot of these fires were done, quote, by a human hand. There's not a lot of information of who might have put these fires, how many of them were caused by a human. But in a press conference by the Civil Protection Minister, Vasilis Kikilias, yesterday, he said that around 667 wildfires broke out in the period of the 15 days of this unprecedented heat wave that the country experienced. That amounts to about 60 wildfires in a single day. He said specifically also that a lot of these fires were done by a human hand, whether those were intentionally or unintentionally. So far since the beginning of July, though, there have been 21 people that have been arrested, 19 of them men and 2 women, while most of them were done unintentionally, according to the authorities. 2 of them were done with intention to burn parts of the farmland and areas that were residential areas. The authorities have been saying that though they don't know a lot of the motives of the people, 2 of them have been arrested also on the island of Rhodes, people on the island of Evia, but also people on the island of Corfu, where the anti-terror unit has also been flown in to assist with the investigation.
The fires have obviously destroyed houses, factories, agricultural land. The damage is enormous. Who's going to pay for it all?
Well, that's what everybody's saying, is like, who is going to pay my destroyed house? Who's going to pay for my hotel? And who's going to pay the money that I was supposed to get paid by working at a hotel? So there's a number of people that have been affected, from farmland, business people, even everyday workers that migrated from the mainland to the islands for the season to make some money to be able to live throughout the year. The government has come out quite fast and said that you will be compensated for it. We will record all the damage and we will give you the money even as fast as in September. Now, from the area of Athens, north of Athens and south of the Greek capital, the first wildfires, the damages have been recorded and people are already applying for compensation. While on the island of Rhodes, Corfu, and in Evia, the ones that lasted longer and later on from the fires in the mainland and in Athens, in the next few hours, the platform will open for them to apply for those damages. But a lot of people are still worried as when will that happen, because still there's a lot of people that haven't been compensated since the wildfires in 2021.
It's peak holiday season. Ordinarily, tens of thousands of people around the world would be flocking to Greece. What kind of effect have these wildfires had on tourism, or are they likely to have on tourism?
Well, we have seen an immediate impact, and of course the images of the thousands of tourists that fled the island of Rhodes, around 19,000 with their bags and thick smoke over them. Those images really made headlines around the world, and a lot of people that have booked their holidays even canceled them before going to Rhodes, or not only Rhodes. Some of the operators were saying some parts of Greece are not even safe because of the high alert that the country was in because of these heat waves and the wildfires. We saw an immediate effect on tourism, but also we're likely to see it in the months to come, because if people will not be able to come to Greece and are afraid of it, that's going to have an impact throughout the winter as well. But the Minister of Tourism, Mrs. Kefalogianni, said that the area is safe, that we will provide you with the safety. The safety is already there, but also said for those who lost your holiday season or the money that you paid, we will compensate you. And let's have a listen.
We now have the know-how of how to also deal with this kind of situations. So we will be trying to create this program in order for the visitors who were not allowed to conclude their vacations to come back and use the voucher that they had for their vacation these days.
And unfortunately, a lot of the people who were planning to come here have now canceled their holiday. So, of course, this has an immediate effect, although the minister said it will compensate them. But we'll see that more throughout the months in fall and in the winter.
Evangelo, thank you for that. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in the city of Karditsa in Greece. And Greece on the agenda again in just a minute or so. My colleague Juliet Mann will be here with this week's The Agenda. In this week's show, an exclusive interview with the Governor of the Bank of Greece. That's The Agenda right after the World Today at 16:30 GMT here on CGTN. The cargo ship that caught fire off the Dutch coast earlier this week is now understood to have been carrying over 500 electric vehicles and not the 25 previously reported. One crew member was killed and several others injured when the fire broke out on the Panamanian-registered Fremantle Highway. Officials are investigating claims that a battery in one of the EVs on board exploded. All Ryanair flights in and out of Belgium's Charleroi airport have been cancelled due to strike action by pilots. Almost 100 flights and 17,000 passengers are expected to be affected. Pilots' unions are demanding the reversal of pay cuts brought in during the COVID pandemic and protesting a reduction in rest days. Football and France have won a dramatic 2-1 victory over Brazil at the Women's World Cup. A late header in the final 7 minutes of the game gave the French team their winning goal. Les Bleus are now joint top in their group. Jamaica also topped the group after a 1-0 victory against Panama. It was a goalless first half before Jamaica scored in the 56th minute. Panama are now out of the tournament. Jamaica will play Brazil next. And Sweden have secured their place in the knockout stage after thrashing Italy 5-0. They scored 3 goals just before half-time, putting the Italians under a considerable amount of pressure. Italy could still make it through to the last 16 if they win against South Africa on Wednesday. China has taken an early lead in the medals table at the World University Games being held in Chengdu after winning 2 martial art golds. China's Cao Maoyan won the game's first gold in the men's Nanchuan style of Kung Fu. Team China have also bagged 1 silver and 2 bronzes in the shooting. India is in second place with 2 golds, while Hong Kong and South Korea have each claimed 1 gold. A further 11 gold medals are up for grabs in events including judo, shooting and taekwondo. And finally, these pictures are from the Italian International Balloon Grand Prix. Around 100 hot air balloons from across the world have filled the sky above Perugia to take part in what certainly is a race with a view. The headlines again. President Putin promises Africa grain and debt write-offs as Moscow seeks new allies. But Africa's leaders tell him the war in Ukraine is threatening global food security. Our other headlines: the EU suspends aid and military support to the West African state of Niger after the army ceases power. And China and France look to deepen economic ties in the face of the EU's pledge to de-risk from Beijing. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel, on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. More news at the top of this hour. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.